Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Once upon a time, in a small English village, there lived a young woman named Elizabeth Bennet. Elizabeth was known everywhere for being smart, funny, and having a quick sense of humor. However, she lived in a world where people cared a lot about how rich and important you were. Elizabeth had 4 sisters: Jane, Mary, Catherine, Kitty, and Lydia. Their mother, Mrs. Bennet, really wanted to find good husbands for her daughters, and she talked about it all the time. One day, they heard that a rich and unmarried man named Mr. Charles Bingley had moved into a big house nearby. Mrs. Bennet was very excited. She thought Mr. Bingley could be a great husband for one of her daughters, especially Jane, who was very pretty and kind. As luck would have it, Jane and Mr. Bingley got to know each other at a party and started to like each other. But Mr. Bingley's sisters and his best friend, Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy, didn't seem to like Jane very much. Mr. Darcy was known in the area as a rich and serious man. Some people thought he was too proud and unfriendly, but he had a kind heart under his serious exterior. When he met Elizabeth at the same party, he found her interesting because she was smart and funny. However, Elizabeth didn't like Mr. Darcy at first. She thought he was too proud and looked down on people who were not as rich as him. This first impression made her not like him very much. As time went on, Mr. Darcy's feelings for Elizabeth started to change. He found her clever and liked how she didn't always do what everyone else did. He admired her independence and how she wasn't afraid to speak her mind. But Elizabeth's first opinion of Mr. Darcy didn't change. She still thought he was proud, and they had some misunderstandings that kept them apart. While all of this was happening, Lydia, the youngest Bennet sister, did something very bad. She ran away with a man named Mr. George Wickham, who seemed nice but was not honest. Lydia's actions were a big problem and could bring shame to the Bennet family. To their surprise, Mr. Darcy secretly helped solve the problem. He used his money and influence to find Lydia and make Mr. Wickham marry her. This helped the Bennet family a lot, but Elizabeth didn't know about Mr. Darcy's help. Meanwhile, Jane and Mr. Bingley's relationship had some problems. Because of Mr. Bingley's sisters, Jane thought he didn't like her anymore. She didn't know that his sisters were trying to keep them apart. This made Jane very sad. Eventually, Mr. Bingley realized what was happening and how much he loved Jane. He came back to her and asked her to marry him. Jane said yes, and they were very happy. Elizabeth's relationship with Mr. Darcy stayed difficult, and she found out that he had something to do with Jane and Mr. Bingley being apart. She was very angry with him and told him so. It was during this conversation that Mr. Darcy asked her to marry him. Elizabeth was surprised, and didn't know what to say. She was filled with emotions and said no. She told Mr. Darcy that he was wrong to separate Jane and Mr. Bingley, and that he was proud and unkind. Mr. Darcy was sad that Elizabeth said no, but he didn't give up. He wrote her a long letter explaining his actions and how much he cared for her. In the letter, he also told her about Mr. Wickham's dishonesty and how he helped her family. Time passed, and slowly Elizabeth learned the truth. Jane and Mr. Bingley got married and were very happy. The rest of the Bennet family had their own joys and problems, but our story focuses on Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy. Elizabeth went to visit Mr. Darcy's big house, called Pemberley. There she saw his kindness and how he helped his employees. She realized that there was more to Mr. Darcy than she had first thought. One day, while walking near a beautiful lake on the estate, Elizabeth met Mr. Darcy again. They had a heartfelt conversation, and it became clear that they were in love with each other. Mr. Darcy asked Elizabeth to marry him once more, and this time she said yes. In the end, Pride and Prejudice is a story about love overcoming misunderstandings and the power of second chances. Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy showed that you can't always judge someone by your first impression, and that true love can bring people together no matter how different they are.